unseemly and just completely tear her to pieces, as sometimes those types of events can turn into an absolute circus.
Now the Yale Law School professor Amy Chua, author of the bestseller Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, is denying that damaging story in The Guardian about her telling would-be clerks to dress in a certain way when interviewing for jobs with Brett Kavanaugh. And the inference was that Kavanaugh liked a certain kind of pretty model look around his office. Everything that's being said about the advice I gave to students applying to Brett Kavanaugh is outrageous, says Amy Chua, 100% false, and the exact opposite of everything I've stood for and said for the last 15 years. It leaves you in a position of what? Not knowing what's what here. What do you think about it?
I think it's very confusing, and I'd like to know who made that allegation that Amy had stipulated how the pretty girls had to dress to get a job with him.
Yeah.
And I mean, I sort of think where there's smoke, there's fire, but in Trump's whole jurisdiction, it reads sort of like fiction to me. But Professor Ford and the other woman who has come forward, they deserve to be heard, but he also deserves to defend himself.
It is an interesting situation. Amy Chua says all she told them to do was dress professionally. That's her account of it. But some of the reportage is telling... She is getting a fair hearing in media, at least. But in terms of second-guessing, I mean, some of the reportage is telling her story, as with the New Zealand Herald's big read today, with great sympathy. But we just don't quite know, and so on
in that environment where it's impossible for us to know because we have a paucity of detail and evidence in order to be able to categorically say one way or the other, or even confidently say one way or the other, then we should always be hesitant. We shouldn't demonise her as to the position that she's making it all up, and we certainly shouldn't treat him as a saint, as if he's never done anything wrong, but treat it with... And to the extent to which evidence is in the future ever going to be made available is probably limited. So we are in a very difficult situation. In fact, the public are probably in the worst situation to try and adduce the truth and the reality of this.
Yeah, no, true. It may not yet be left in limbo, but at the moment it is. Just before we go, Simon Bridges criticised the government on Twitter after Housing New Zealand said it would compensate people evicted from state houses after the overreaction to now suspect methamphetamine testing. So he described those evicted as meth crooks. Maybe 800 current and former state house tenants will be eligible for some form of assistance. So let's say there were the guilty as well as the innocent, with no easy way now of sorting out culpability there. Where do you both stand on the issue of state house meth compensation, please? Final thoughts.
I think it's merited on a case-by-case basis. I don't think it should be a carte blanche. And I see that people who rented out houses, private landlords, they too wanted to be compensated. But I agree with Housing New Zealand and the Housing Minister who said no. So I think, no, there is merit, especially for those people who had nothing to do with meth at all. Those who were convicted or had meth, they'd obviously smoked it or whatever they do, cook it. They shouldn't have any right at all.
If that can be sorted. Yeah, OK. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, ditto. Well put, Sally. Well put. I agree.
OK. Oh, that was admirably brief, last comment. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're turning up the music,
yeah.
Jim.
Sorry,
what else can I do?
I can't hear. Chris Gallivan, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Sally Wanley too.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We're back tomorrow, and here is Checkpoint.
Mai haere mai ki te hotaka o te ahi o te rā tuataki o te wikimaki. Welcome to Checkpoint for the first day of the working week. I'm Alex Perrottet. On tonight's program, Winston Peters says all Australian strawberries imported to New Zealand will be rigorously checked for signs of sabotage after needles were found in a punnet bought in Auckland. It's been hailed as one of the greatest comebacks in sporting history. Golfer Tiger Woods nabs his first tournament win in 5 years. The University of Wellington has ditched the Vic. It's Victoria University of Wellington no more. Students at Fraser High School in Hamilton walk out of class to protest a principal's speech. Don't blame my compost. A Carterton property owner blames hysteria and a recent gastrobug for children falling ill on Friday. And spring has a false start. Don't put the duvets away yet.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. The Carterton property owner who sparked an emergency response had an inkling on Friday his compost may have been responsible. But Ilya McClellan says he doubts the compost was responsible for making children at Southend School sick. About 10 children were taken to hospital and more than 24 were put through a decontamination tent after pupils reported feeling sick from a foul smell. The compost manufacturer confirms it can emit a strong sulphur smell, especially when heated. But Mr McClellan says that, given the compost's strong stench, he thought it may have been a factor in what happened at the school.
The thing that threw me out was that someone mentioned that the times were different around when the kids got sick and when our compost had been delivered. But then I thought, well, it must have been a factor because I knew that the stuff was quite pungent. So I figured that it had contributed to some of the panic or the feeling among the kids that there was some chemical smell. And then someone had mentioned a plane. And I think just a lot of factors came together and caused quite a few of the kids to get worried that they were sick.
Southend School neighbour Ilya McClellan. A parent of a student at Fraser High School in Hamilton says comments by the principal about truancy and how it could affect students were over the top and insensitive. Virginia Crawford told a school assembly that truants were highly likely to go to prison, commit or be a victim of domestic violence, be a rape victim, a suicide victim, unemployed, have major health problems, die early and have an addiction. More than 100 students left their classes this morning to protest outside the school gates. A parent, Justine Kettle, says just because a student is a truant doesn't mean they're losers.
I'd like them to learn, yes, but I think it's going to be hard to learn when you've got the principal telling you you're a loser and that you're going to get raped because you wagged. It's sending the wrong message to the kids.
Justine Kettle says Virginia Crawford needs to front up and apologise. Law firm Russell McVeigh is investigating a complaint relating to a partner making inappropriate comments while attending a client event under the influence of alcohol. Its chair, Malcolm Crotty, confirmed a partner won't be at work while an independent investigation is underway. He says everyone in the organisation knows what's expected of them and the firm will not tolerate any inappropriate behaviour. A more detailed statement following the outcome of the investigation is expected within the next 2 weeks. The Victoria University Council has voted 9-2 this afternoon to change its name to University of Wellington, dropping the reference to the former monarch. More than 2,000 submissions were received, with 75% opposing the change. Paloma Magoni reports.
Alumni and students were strongly against the move. Staff gave mixed feedback, and the university stakeholders, including regional mayors, were mostly in favour. The Vice-Chancellor Grant Guilford, who recommended the name change to the council, declared a conflict of interest and did not vote. The name change is an attempt to distinguish Wellington's university from 15 other tertiary providers around the world with Victoria in their name. In July, the council agreed in principle to remove the name Victoria, also adopting a new Maori name, Te Heranga Waka. The name change still requires the Education Minister's approval. This is Paloma Migoni.
The Prime Minister is laying out the clear differences between her government and the US administration as her US counterpart arrived at the United Nations in New York. Jacinda Ardern today rejected Donald Trump's plan to escalate the war on drugs, while also restating New Zealand's support for the Iran nuclear deal, which Mr Trump has pulled out of. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell is in New York.
Donald Trump jetted into New York this afternoon with a massive motorcade belting through Midtown Manhattan. His big event today hosting a group of countries who've agreed to sign up to the US's document called the Global Call to Action on the World Drug Problem. But Jacinda Ardern won't be there as New Zealand is not signing up to it. She also continues to back the Iran nuclear deal, which Donald Trump has withdrawn from. Ms Ardern says it's an example of a multilateral deal that works. In New York, Chris Bramwell.
It's 5:05. Sport. Tiger Woods says he's relished the challenge of holding his nerve to complete a remarkable return to the winner's circle on golf's PGA Tour. The 14-time major champion broke a 5-year drought to win the season-ending Tour Championship in Atlanta this morning, capping a comeback which included 4 back surgeries. Woods entered the final round with a 3-shot lead but says he was lapping up the pressure.
It was just a grind out there. I loved every bit of it, and the fight and the grind and the tough conditions, and just have to suck it up and hit shots, and loved every bit of it.
Tiger Woods. The All Blacks say they need to up their game to secure the Rugby Championship title in Argentina this weekend. A bonus point win over the Pumas in Buenos Aires on Sunday would guarantee New Zealand the trophy. But halfback TJ Perenara believes the All Blacks' performance will need to improve from their 22-point win over Argentina in Nelson earlier this month.
We know the threats that they have, and just know as a unit we need to be better going forward. If we play to the level that we played in Nelson, we don't know if that's good enough this time, especially over here in their backyard. We know we have to step it up and play better than we played against them this year already.
TJ Perenara. And the Sydney Roosters halfback Cooper Cronk admits he's a long shot to play in Sunday's National Rugby League Grand Final against Melbourne due to a shoulder injury. That's the news.
Safe houses. The idea of having a no ifs, no buts eviction policy is wrong.
Strawberry scare.
It's the kind of assorted and sick kind of proposition that does arise when these situations are publicised.
Ardern on Trump's turf.
I don't think that she'll be making a beeline, but I think they will. When she comes in, he will greet her and they have a bit of a chat.
Delivering on the news. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, what is the Reserve Bank and what does it do? Governor Adrian Orr explains. And after 10, US education innovator Laura McVeigh says collaboration and creativity will equip students for their future workplaces. That's coming up on 9 to noon with Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the central high country, also wide at upper. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms from late this afternoon until tomorrow afternoon, mainly in the west. Snow to 800 metres about the central plateau tomorrow. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, however, a few showers this evening and again tomorrow. Nelson, showers today, possibly thundery late afternoon, mainly fine tomorrow. Buller and Westland, showers, some heavy today. Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, rain or showers with heavy falls and snow lowering to 400 metres, clearing tomorrow morning. Showers returning to Otago later tomorrow with snow to 100 metres and southwest gales near the coast. Southland and Fiordland, showers, snow to 300 metres tonight and to 100 metres later tomorrow with southwest gales near the coast. And the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's almost 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Good evening, great to join you. My name's Alex Perrottet and lots to come on the program tonight. Strawberry screening after the scare in Australia spreads to New Zealand. Tiger Woods is back, first win in 5 years. Fraser High School students walk out in protest at their principal's speech, and the Met Service warns of a wintry spring blast. In breaking news as well, we're also chasing more on the latest Russell McVeigh complaint mentioned in the news. Its chairman Malcolm Crotty has confirmed a partner has been restricted from the workplace. This is while an independent investigation is underway. The complaint relates to the partner making inappropriate comments while attending a client event under the influence of alcohol. Mr Crotty has declined to be interviewed this evening on Checkpoint, but we are continuing to make calls on this story. But let's begin tonight in Carterton. The owner of Compost, thought to have sparked an emergency response at a Carterton school on Friday, says he'd be very surprised if anyone could get sick from it. About 10 children were taken to hospital and more than 2 dozen were put through a decontamination tent after pupils reported feeling ill from a foul smell in the air. This morning, police confirmed the sulphuric smell came from hot compost on a neighbouring property which was delivered on Friday afternoon. Katie Doyle has spent the day in Carterton.
This morning's school run for parents and pupils at Carterton's South End School had an air of anxiety, with many parents choosing to attend an assembly where there was a debrief of Friday's events. Shortly after, the police held a media conference to announce they'd found the source of the stink.
Just after 1 o'clock on Friday, one of the neighbouring properties next to the school had a truckload of compost delivered to their address. Now that compost was fresh, and as part of that it was actually hot. So part of the process for compost is to heat it to up to 80 degrees Celsius. When that occurs with the other manufacturing processes within that compost, that creates a sulphur smell. Now that sulphur smell can be very strong.
Initial reports suggested the children had got sick after 2 o'clock, but police revised their timings after determining the first children fell ill at about 1:20, shortly after the compost was delivered. The owner of the compost, Ilya McLennan, says he had an inkling on Friday that the compost may have been responsible, given the smell the children were complaining about.
The thing that threw me out was that someone mentioned that the times were different around when the kids got sick and when our compost had been delivered. So I sort of discounted a little bit, but then I thought, well, it must have been a factor because I knew that the stuff was quite pungent.
Talk of a plane dropping a white substance also confused matters and fuelled speculation in the small community about who or what was responsible. Inspector Miller says those children who complained of feeling sick had all been playing on the school's backfield at lunchtime, which is adjacent to the property where the compost was dumped.
We've spoken to the local manufacturer of that compost, and they have confirmed that there would be, on occasion, at times, because of the heat, a strong sulphur smell, and that is what we have established as the effect on the children.
Inspector Miller says the children's symptoms, including dizziness, nausea, sore eyes and headaches, were consistent with exposure to sulphur. But Mr McLennan doubts the compost was responsible.
I'd be very surprised if the illness, like the sickness that presented, came from the compost. But yeah, I definitely think that the smell would have been noticeable to the kids. And then the fact that one of them said they saw a plane and stuff coming out of it as well would have contributed to the hysteria that erupted.
Mr McLennan says this is the third batch of compost they've had delivered from Parkvale mushrooms, and the first time it's been an issue. He says they grow their vegetables in it and their dog eats it without consequences. He says he'd hate for Parkvale mushrooms to suffer any adverse consequences.
If anyone's listening and they need some compost, they should get some of it. It's bloody good compost.
Mr McLennan says he was visited by the police this morning, who asked him to spread the compost thinly so it wouldn't happen again. Health professionals didn't believe the children will suffer any ongoing effects as a result of the incident. For Checkpoint in Wellington, Katie Doyle.
It's 12.5 minutes past 5. All Australian strawberries imported here will be rigorously checked for signs of sabotage after needles were found in a punnet sold in an Auckland supermarket yesterday. The needles were found in Western Australian strawberries bought at the St Luke's Countdown. Now, there's been a rash of similar cases in Australia covering 5 states over the past 2 weeks. Australian strawberries are still coming into the country despite the scare. But this afternoon, the Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters caused confusion when he said all of the strawberries will be checked here by authorities as well as in Australia. Katie Scotcher has more.
The needles found yesterday were the first to be found in Choice brand strawberries. The customer who bought them wasn't harmed. Paul Danstead, the Director of Food Safety from MPI, told Checkpoint last week MPI would hunt down any copycat saboteurs in New Zealand. He says Australian strawberries are still coming into the country, and he's unsure as to the origin of the needles.
The initial indications were strawberries with needles in them from a particular line. That appeared to be the factor in front of us. So we don't think that additional restrictions would be required or were required at that time. What we have in front of us now appears to be something different, but that is the basis for a police investigation.
Mr Danstead says the strawberries exported from Australia are checked through a metal detector before they leave the country. But this afternoon, Winston Peters said the strawberries will also be rigorously investigated here.
We're doing the best we can with all the resources we've got. There's going to be, in terms of exporting into this country, screening of every strawberry punnet. But this is all I can answer at this point in time.
However, the Primary Industries Minister, Damien O'Connor, says that's not correct and there will be no new checks. The crisis comes just as strawberry growers here are about to put their fruit on the market. Auckland grower Phil Greig supplies the fruits to supermarkets across the country. He is confident the needles found yesterday were put there in Australia before the fruit was imported to New Zealand. But he says he's taking precautions to ensure needles aren't placed in the berries he supplies.
We don't want really people to know what we're doing because we don't want people to copycat type of thing. So, but it's not a New Zealand problem, it's an Australian problem, but we are watching what we're doing too.
Countdown said in a statement the last shipment of strawberries arrived last Sunday, and the next day the supermarket stopped ordering the fruit from across the ditch. But customers were still able to buy the imported berries from stores until all remaining stock was pulled from the shelves yesterday. Barbara Doherty purchased a punnet of imported strawberries from a Wellington Countdown on Thursday. She says she was assured by the store's manager that the Choice brand was a safe supplier.
I wanted to know why they didn't actually put a sign up in front of the strawberries and say, basically, these are from Australia, but we have checked our supplier, but just to be warned or to be wary or to cut them up, just something to alert the customers.
Shoppers outside the St Luke's Countdown today were less worried about the strawberry sabotage.
I would be hesitant because it might have a needle in it, but then, to be honest, if I did buy some strawberries, I would cut them now to be sure.
How can you hide a needle in a strawberry if you cut it up?
I don't normally buy strawberries from Countdown anyway, so I would get them from a local market. And to be quite frank, strawberries aren't really the top of my fruit favourite list.
Daniel Laufer, a marketing professor at Victoria University, says to ensure consumers don't panic, retailers and suppliers need to make it clear needles haven't been found in New Zealand-grown strawberries.
It would be very helpful to emphasise that there are safeguards here in New Zealand that growers have which minimise the chances of something like that happening compared to the Australian context.
Following yesterday's discovery, there have been no new reports in New Zealand of needles being found in strawberries. I tamaki makoto mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher-aho.
It's right on 17 minutes past 5. It's being hailed as one of the greatest comebacks in sporting history. After 5 years without a win in a golf tournament, 4 back operations and an arrest for driving under the influence, the 14-time major winner, Tiger Woods, has tasted victory once again, winning the Tour Championship in Atlanta, his 80th PGA Tour golf title. It's Woods' first tournament win since 2013, and now he's just 2 titles shy of Sam Snead's all-time list record of 82. Our sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
We thought we'd never see it, and I don't believe he thought either. Tour Championship winner. Tiger Woods, a winner again, number 80.
After 5 years of complications in his personal life and injury woes, Tiger Woods was moved to the brink of tears after winning his first title since 2013. Amid raucous scenes with the massive gallery chanting his name as they stampeded the final fairway, he raised his arms in triumph after tapping in to move within 2 victories of Sam Snead's all-time record of 82 PGA Tour titles.
I was having a hard time not crying coming up last hole, but I said, hey, you know what, I could still blade this thing out of bounds. So let's just suck it up and just hit some shots here. And once I got the ball on the green, then I gave Joey a high five because it was done. I can handle that from there.
The victory caps off a season that started with questions over just whether Woods, who won the last of his 14 major titles 10 years ago, would be able to play a full schedule after undergoing spinal fusion surgery in April last year. Woods says there have been many low points over the past 5 years, with not being able to play golf the least of his worries.
I was beyond playing. I couldn't sit, I couldn't walk, I couldn't lay down without feeling the pain in my back and my leg. So, that was a pretty low point and for a very long time.
The world number 1 Englishman Justin Rose was 4th, but picked up the trophy for finishing top of the FedEx rankings and paid tribute to the 42-year-old Woods.
The world of golf is really proud of you right now, and it's super excited about your game and also the way the game of golf is going. So many great young players. It's nice for us old guys to get a little moment in the sun.
The legendary Jack Nicklaus believes Woods still has a realistic chance of matching his record tally of 18 major championships. Nicklaus says Woods has shown he should be able to compete at the highest level for another decade or so. Woods looked destined to surpass Nicklaus when he won his 14th major at the 2008 US Open, but his career hit the rails after a sex scandal and then a debilitating back injury. Nicholas says Woods has worked hard to get his game back on track, but more importantly, he's got the 5 inches between his head thinking the right way. The former New Zealand golfer, Phil Tautorangi, says Woods' comeback can't be underestimated.
I don't think there were many that thought that we'd ever see this day again, and some people were quite happy about that. 12 months ago, we thought that maybe he might be coming back as a celebrity golfer and not a competitive golfer, and over the last 4 days he's looked anything but a celebrity golfer.
As for the greatest comeback in sporting history, well, Tiger Woods has dismissed that. Earlier this year, when asked how it'd rate should he win his first tournament in 5 years, he was quick to downplay its significance, saying the legendary Ben Hogan, who had to learn to walk again after surviving a head-on crash with a bus in 1949, but then went on to win 6 of his 9 majors, is among the greatest of all comebacks. Woods will now set his sights on surpassing Sam Snead's record mark of 82 tournament wins, but first up he plans on celebrating his return to the winner's circle.
Flying tonight with the guys, it's going to be fun.
You buying drinks?
Yeah, I think we're all going to sleep well.
For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
21 minutes past 5. Students at Fraser High School in Hamilton walked out of class this morning to protest over comments made by their principal last week. Virginia Crawford told a school assembly that truants are highly likely to go to prison, commit or be a victim of domestic violence, be raped, commit suicide, be unemployed, have major health problems, die early and have an addiction. She also said the more a student skips school, the more likely they will end up as just a statistic. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McVeigh was outside the school this morning.
Just before 10 o'clock, over 100 students from the school roll of about 1,500 started filing out of class and headed up the drive to the road. They spent about the next 40 minutes hanging around in groups on either side of the street. On talking with a number of them, it was obvious some were there just to see what was going on, but others were serious in their protest. Adam, who's in year 12, says while Principal Virginia Crawford pointed out the statistics, she did it in an insensitive way.
Not the right place or right time to bring up rape for a lot of people, all these insecure teenagers going through a rough time. Teenagers, as you're growing up, you're going through so many changes, it's just hard to comprehend.
He says the message from the speech was clear.
She's trying to get people to show up to classes and stuff, but...
Do you think it'll work?
The speech?
Yeah. It's got people talking, hasn't it?
In my opinion, no. Because now you've got everyone, you've got everyone's parents and everyone's opinions, and everyone's different opinion, and everyone takes it in a different way, obviously.
Another student, despite being at the protest, supported Mrs. Crawford's message.
Could fail in life, you could, like she said, potentially be a rapist or victim of it, because, you don't know what to do in that situation,
You think the message will get through?
Yeah, I think it'll get through.
Year 12 student Saihunia says a lot of those protesting were doing it to stand up for themselves and others.
At the end of the day, just can't say those things, such as the rape comments. We don't want you, go to a school that wants you. I definitely understand the statistics and what she's trying to say. It does, there is a huge impact on when you wag.
Other students agree the principal had a point, but were angry at the way she delivered it.
I was actually kind of a bit sensitive to what she said, but I could actually understand her message that she was trying to spread.
It's the way she put everyone down and made everybody angry, but at the same time, what she said was true. Wagging is going to cause a lot of shit in life for us young ones.
I was like, yep, she's right in so many ways, but she could have approached it differently, saying it to kids.
Yeah, the message was correct, but she should have said it and given us a warning, because that did affect some people.
No, exactly.
Yeah, exactly, because you don't understand her concept between the message she sent to you. Look, you're wagging right now, of course you didn't understand.
I don't care.
That was 17-year-old Loesi Fafo Sophia berating those around him for playing truant this morning.
These guys making our school look bad, smoking. What the hell are these people doing? Our school is good, it's the people, as you can see, wagging. She was trying to give us a message not to wag.
2 parents and another adult joined the protest to support the students. Justine Kettle says just because someone skips school, it doesn't mean they're a loser and set up for a downward spiral.
I'd like them to learn, yes, but I think it's going to be hard to learn when you've got the principal telling you you're a loser and that you're going to get raped because you wagged. It's sending the wrong message to the kids.
Jo Scott has 1 child at Fraser High. She describes the principal's comments as disgusting.
The kids, for God's sakes, they're not losers.
Wait, wasn't she though saying that, you know, kids who truant a lot are at a disadvantage in life? That was fundamentally the message, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, sort of, but it was the word she used.
Yeah.
I mean, my daughter Wagged, she's now doing courses, wants to become a mechanic, and she's not a loser, so yeah, she just got it all wrong, I'm sorry.
Rosemary says a number of students have now been victimised by the principal.
It's not just because they're not going to school. I mean, that's their choice, but then it's also, you're supposed to be a staff member encouraging these children. That never encouraged them. That's just made them rebel against it. So how much respect is she going to have with her students?
In a written statement from the chair of the Board of Trustees, Jeff Green says the student-led protest lasted for period 2 only, and the students returned to class for period 3, with the school operating as usual. He asks for sensitive reporting on the matter, as the school's mindful that it's a busy and important time of the year for students. The school declined interviews. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
At 26 minutes past 5, there seemed to be a lot of points of view in that news story. Some of the more circumspect and balanced ones, perhaps some of the school children that were interviewed. If you've got a point of view, get in touch. 2101 is the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, as well as getting in touch on Facebook. Or email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Now here's a message: keep the duvets on and don't pack away the heaters just yet. Met Service is warning spring has had a false start and New Zealanders should brace for a wintry blast from tomorrow. The South Island will see snow, rain and lots of cold wind late on Tuesday and into Wednesday. But the North Island will also feel the bite of the cold, with a high of 13 in most areas and a chance of hail. I spoke to Met Service meteorologist Georgina Griffiths, who says there will be driving hazards and, in parts, some problems for farmers whose plants are budding.
We're just starting to see the start of the cold air get into Southland at the moment. It's still about 8 degrees at Invercargill, so it's not really in yet. But we do have heavy rain watches and heavy snow watches for a number of places. But really, it's at the end of Tuesday and into early Wednesday that we see progressively colder air come up and over New Zealand, and we're expecting that snow level to really lower over the lower south and severe gales over the lower south, places like southern Southland, closer to Dunedin and Otago from Tuesday afternoon into Wednesday. So really, it's just snow showers today and tonight and in the early hours of Tuesday for the high country above 400 metres, places like the Canterbury Plains or high country south of the river, Rangitata River, and for inland and northern Otago. But above 400 metres, quite high elevation snow showers in the current load of watches and warnings. Watches. Once we hit Tuesday night and into early Wednesday, we're going to have a repeat batch of heavy rain and snow watches or warnings down in the far south, and very likely a severe southwest gale warning over the far southeast of the country. And the key thing around this is that it's not a great time of year for the farming community, with that wind chill, that blizzard-like conditions Tuesday night into Wednesday. So from a stock point of view and a driving point of view, pretty hazardous from more or less tonight and especially Tuesday night and into Wednesday in the far south of the country.
Right, well, that's a good warning, Georgina, I suppose, because I think last time we had that cold snap, we had all those lambs that died. So I guess there's a bit of warning there for people to get them under cover.
Oh, well, we had great big warnings for snow, and they were warnings, not just watches last time. Now, this is a very different snow event, actually. Last time we were going for a lot of snow, depth of snow, and at low elevations. This one is just showery, but it's the wind chill that we really expect. For example, I'll give you an idea, expected snow at Queenstown Airport, and lots of it last time. Places like the Crown Range Road, we were putting in warnings for 45 centimetres of snow. This time we're going for 2 to 5 centimetres overnight, for example, at the Crown Range Road, and nothing, and maybe a couple of mixed snow flurry and growlpours at Queenstown Airport overnight. So quite a different beast. This is a cold air outbreak, and the key thing for people to understand is that progressively gets colder as we move through Tuesday and into Wednesday morning. And I just advise people to keep up with the watches and warnings for wind, and that wind chill is a really large factor in the lower south. And of course it actually is a cold week overall for the rest of the country. Once that southwesterly comes all the way up the country by end of play tomorrow, in fact even places like Auckland, extremely windy for us. Very windy around this, elevated parts of the central North Island as well. Even have a road snow warning in force for the desert road. Just talking a couple of centimetres through until Tuesday afternoon, but enough to impact even the North Island. So,
right. And Georgina, what sort of temperatures are we talking there? Sorry, there's lots of wind, even for the North Island, bit of snow on the desert road. How cold will it be?
Well, it depends on where you are, of course. I'm just looking for lovely places like Wellington will have, an air temperature into Tuesday and Wednesday, a maximum temperature of maybe 9 or 10, but with the wind chill, it will feel much colder. When you're talking down south, I'd say we have 4 or 5, but with that wind chill, places like Invercargill and Southland might have a near zero wind chill Tuesday afternoon and evening. So we're really going to drop the temperature, and it will feel much colder than it actually is with that wind chill tomorrow and into early Wednesday. So you can always have a look at the app and see what the feels like temperature it looks like, and it's going to be pretty cold nationally, high of 13 or 14 for many North Island places. So that's pretty unusual for late September. Not record probably, but pretty unusual. Might be in that, coldest few days that we would have, handful of few days for late September, even for places like Auckland.
Wow. So don't pack the duvets away yet?
No, spring has had a false start. That's a good way to sell it, I guess. And it is a cold week. We do see an improvement, though. Thursday and Friday see a ridge start moving in. And for the growers around, particularly those with bud break going on, and it's a really mission-critical time of year for the horticulturists around New Zealand, we're actually expecting a risk of frost, but inland areas and many areas across the country, Thursday morning and again Friday morning. So, yeah, as soon as we lose the wind and that goes away on Thursday and into Friday, we start seeing the risk of frost pop up. So, right. Yeah, just pay attention if you're growing or if you're farming in New Zealand this week.
It's just coming up to 28 minutes to 6. Thanks for your feedback. Shelley's been in touch. Kia ora, Checkpoint. Using the deficit model to give the message to these young people is never going to cut it. That's a lack of imagination on the principal's part. Raising awareness is fantastic. Who gets the credit there? Well, we need to listen. That's Shelley's point of view. There's more coming in on the texts. How articulate were those kids? No cause for despair there. Some of us thought the same. Another point of view, a stern message at the right time of life can make youth think about the rest of their life. And I think this is from Judith. I think the principal was on the money to point out what the likelihood of continually missing school is. It isn't just the missing of schoolwork, it's also a bad habit to acquire, which will be detrimental if they want to transition to the workforce. Then again, they may want to stay children and lounge about with friends. Guess what? That's when they become a statistic, not an adult. That's from Judith. More coming up soon. Yes, some of those stories coming up before 6. The Green Party says National Leader Simon Bridges is not fit to run a political party after he described state tenants who were kicked out of their homes as meth crooks. Victoria University becomes the University of Wellington, a convincing vote there. And in a shock announcement, the head of Australia's public broadcaster, the ABC, has been sacked by the board just 2 years into her 5-year tenure. Before all that, someone whose job's pretty secure, Katrina Batten.
The Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters has mistakenly announced a border-wide screening for imported Australian strawberries. Needles were found in strawberries for the first time in New Zealand yesterday in a punnet imported from Western Australia. There's been a rash of similar cases in Australia over the past fortnight. Victoria University is to change its name. The university's council voted 9-2 to make the change, despite 3/4 of the more than 2,000 submissions opposing the change. The council says it wants to distinguish the university from 15 others around the world that have the name of their former monarch in the title. A Carterton property owner says he had an inkling on Friday a load of fresh compost may have been to blame for the emergency at the school next door. About 10 children were taken to hospital and more than 24 went through a decontamination tent after pupils reported feeling sick from a foul smell. Ilya McClellan says he thought the compost's strong stench may have been a factor in what happened at the school. A parent of a student at Hamilton's Fraser High School says the principal's comments about truancy were over the top and insensitive. Students protested outside the school and gates this morning after Virginia Crawford reeled off in assembly a range of health and social problems that could befall truants. Parent Justine Kettle says just because a student is a truant doesn't mean they're losers, and she's calling on the principal to apologise. Law firm Russell McVeigh is investigating a complaint relating to a partner making inappropriate comments while attending a client event under the influence of alcohol. Its chair, Malcolm Crotty, says everyone in the organisation knows what to expect, what is expected of them, and the firm will not tolerate inappropriate behaviour. A more detailed statement is expected within the next 2 weeks. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Turning to business now with Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Good evening.
Good evening.
So there's been a court decision in Britain and it's forced high-profile company director Eric Watson to pay, is it $50 million?
That's apparently the number. We heard from Sir Owen Glenn. It's a former partner of Eric Watson. And the case is around a joint venture the parties were involved in. That case has been going on for years. I mean, the litigation, we're talking 7 years. The decision of the court was in a 385-page document, and it took a year for a judge to come up with a ruling on it. So you can imagine this is quite complex. It involves a number of jurisdictions. I don't think that the legal issues are over yet.
Might be an appeal, you're saying?
Well, not just an appeal, more an other action. It's so complex, it's difficult for us to sort of unpack it
Cover
here.
all the issues just
but
now, sure.
Just suffice to say that Sir Owen issued a statement saying that he's going to pursue his rightful claims to the ends of the earth.
What, to
maybe
New Zealand?
Possibly literally, we don't exactly know. And you know what, we spoke with him a little earlier this afternoon, and we have a little bit of what he had to say.
I could have done better with my time than have to chase down Mr. Watson and get justice. So, you know, how would anybody feel having to fight to get your rights and having your health deteriorate because of it, when you could have done a lot more with your time, with your family, with your friends, with philanthropy, with business, with government? You know, it's just been a waste of 7 years, about 2/3 of my time over 7 years.
Now, Sir Owen has been sick for some time. He has cancer, and he's in his late 70s. He basically said that he does come across people in all walks of life who come over to him and congratulate him for taking this action. Now, we did try to contact Eric Watson, and we were unsuccessful, but I'm sure he would have something to say about all of it. Certainly, this isn't the end of the story.
Great, we might hear from him later in the week. Directors have found recommendations, or some of them, of the tax working group to be a little worrisome.
Yes. Now, look, the Institute of Directors did make some submissions to the tax working group, but one thing they didn't cover off was this recommendation that directors should be held liable for the unpaid debts associated with PAYE, which is the pay-as-you-go remit that employers make, as well as GST payments, which again, companies are required to pay to Inland Revenue. Inland Revenue has already mechanisms in place to collect these debts. The Institute of Directors says it's overkill. And not only that, it will cause directors to take more risk-adverse positions. That's not their job. Their job is to properly assess risks for companies and make appropriate decisions, weighing up risks. If you start loading on these personal liabilities, it will make it much more difficult for these directors to take those positions, and also make it less likely that people will want to sit on boards. And that's quite important, especially for smaller companies that have a harder time recruiting
I guess the
directors.
opposition, though, will be that it will make them make far more responsible decisions.
Well, not really. I mean, why would that be an issue if you think about it? PAYE is a corporate responsibility, and so is GST. It has nothing to do with whether you have a board or not. If you're an employer, you must pay that. It's got no difference whether or not you've got a board of directors or not. Small companies, all sorts of people who collect GST have to pay that, as well as people who employ. So why is it a director responsibility? Not exactly sure. Certainly the Institute of Directors are going to be challenging that and going back to the government on that one, since they didn't make any recommendations. They just simply didn't even think it was an issue.
Wow.
So,
We've been talking about power prices recently, and I guess the big message about that went out a couple of weeks ago was that purchasers should be looking and playing the field
so to speak.
To basically try to get the best rate. And if that means changing your supplier, regularly, so be it. Now the same message is coming out about broadband providers.
Yes, there's a company called Broadband Compare who does research, and so Broadband Compare did some research on people who switch and found that generally households save $400 a year. That's a considerable saving. So the message there is shop around. You know, shop around, see if you can get the best deal. And you know, obviously there are some deals to be had. So that's what the research shows.
And the competition is there. You might as well use it.
There's a lot of competition, that's for sure. There's hardly any margin in broadband. That's definitely the case. And companies are prepared to do what they can to get customers, because once customers tend to lock themselves into a broadband, they tend to not switch because there's hardly anything that really goes wrong with that service. And the customer themselves has enormous value to companies, so they will do what they can to attract customers to their company. Yep.
Before you go, Nona, what happened to the markets?
Well, look, our own top 50 index, it fell 0.4%. That was down 38 points to 9,338. And that's interesting because, you know, it's really, the volumes weren't great. A lot of Asia's on holiday right now. Today is the Festival of the Moon for the Chinese festival. Yeah, so it's a big holiday in lots of parts of Asia, and so we saw very thin trading there. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 66.7 US cents. That's very little change from where it was over the weekend, and 91.7 Australian. Where we have seen some movement, though, was some gains against the pence that came late Friday after the Prime Minister there seemed to suggest that a Brexit deal wasn't imminent and might not even, you know, come about. So that was at 51 pence, and that's how we ended the day.
Great. Enjoy your mooncakes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier there with the latest business news. It's coming up to 18 minutes to 6. The Green Party says National leader Simon Bridges is not fit to run a political party after he described state tenants who were kicked out of their homes as meth crooks. Last week, Housing New Zealand released a report admitting it shouldn't have turfed out tenants based on methamphetamine contamination guidelines, which have since found to be grossly inadequate. The period was dubbed meth hysteria, during which hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent unnecessarily on stripping out homes and hundreds of state tenants were kicked out. The Greens say National is now amplifying that hysteria by calling those finally up for some recompense crooks. Here's political reporter Gia Garrick.
Simon Bridges took to Twitter last week saying the government was going to compensate meth crooks. This morning he backed up his comment.
Paying people where Housing New Zealand has determined they have smoked or cooked pee those tenants have, I'm sorry, that is wrong. That is money that should not be going to them.
But the Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, made it clear when Housing New Zealand released its report last week that it would not be blanket compensation.
There will be quite an in-depth and case-by-case assessment of each instance where a tenant had their tenancy terminated because of meth contamination. In instances where there was contamination above the Gluckman threshold, they will not be eligible for financial assistance. In cases where tenants were involved with manufacturing or dealing, and where there is evidence to support that contention, so that there is a level of natural justice at play, they will also not be eligible for compensation.
The Gluckman threshold is based on the report by Sir Peter Gluckman, the Prime Minister's former Chief Science Advisor. His assessment debunked the myth that exposure to low levels of methamphetamine contamination is harmful to people's health. The level of contamination, his report said, could be 10 times higher than the level people were kicked out of their homes for, and even then there is only a low risk to health. Its release in May led to a series of apologies from top officials, the new Housing Minister and the head of Housing New Zealand, and this from Simon Bridges.
We got the wrong, ultimately it now seems clear from Sir Peter Gluckman, dud advice.
Will you offer an apology as the leader of the National Party now to those tenants who were needlessly evicted and uprooted from their lives and homes? Will you do that?
Yeah, I'm sorry that the advice that we got was wrong and it's made this situation what it is.
Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson is enraged Mr Bridges can sort of apologise, then continue today to play petty politics.
Continuing to put harmful stigma against people, including families with children, elderly people,
who were uprooted, had to find new homes, new communities, lost a lot of their possessions, whole lives are impacted on. And what does Simon choose to do? He chooses to keep whipping them.
Ms Davidson says she is angry and frustrated at Mr Bridges.
Is not at all fit to be ever leading this country, let alone a political party.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says Mr Bridges is merely making cheapskate allegations in an attempt to take the heat off the previous government's mishandling of the matter.
If there is proof of criminality, of course they won't get compensation, and I'm ashamed that someone who's got a legal background, or supposedly got one, is making that allegation.
Housing New Zealand declined to comment on whether the agency would be compensating meth crooks, as Mr Bridges put it, saying the national leader's comments had been addressed by the minister. But it is encouraging past and former tenants who believe they may be eligible for government assistance to get in touch. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
It's 5:45. In a shock announcement, the head of Australia's public broadcaster, the ABC, has been sacked by the board. Michelle Guthrie, who was the first woman to head the ABC, was dismissed just halfway through her 5-year term. Until recently, she'd served as a director of Auckland Airport. She's called her dismissal unjustified and is taking legal action. Elizabeth Brown has more.
Michelle Guthrie began her career as a media lawyer and worked with a range of media companies in Australia and overseas. She joined the ABC in 2016 as the highest paid managing director in its history, earning about $1 million a year. There have been reports of a split between her and the board chair, Justin Milne, over the future of the organisation. But he's denied that, saying simply that the board wanted a different leadership style.
The circumstances are really that we, the board, have been meeting about this matter over the course of the last 2 or 3 months and discussing our relationship with Michelle and her performance, and ultimately we all came to the conclusion that the interests of the corporation were best served by terminating her employment with the ABC, and that's what we've done this morning.
In her 2.5 years at the helm, Michelle Guthrie has faced critics from both inside and outside the organisation as she tried to drive an ambitious digitisation program. Government funding cuts meant unpopular cost-saving measures, while Rupert Murdoch's News Corp regularly attacked the ABC, accusing it of political bias. Her relationship with the government was also frosty, with some MPs publicly calling out what they saw as the ABC's unfair news coverage. Speaking earlier this year to the Melbourne Press Club, Michelle Guthrie hit back at some of that criticism.
I talk here of my very valuable colleagues who have displayed enormous resolve, dedication and commitment over the past few years in the face of continued criticism. But I also refer to the people of Australia who regard the ABC as one of the great national institutions and who deeply resent it being used as a punching bag by narrow political, commercial or ideological interests.
Board Chair Justin Milne has admitted Michelle Guthrie's relationship with the government could have been better, but he denies there was any political pressure from Canberra over her dismissal.
Nobody in Canberra has provided the slightest pressure on the board to do anything in relation to Ms Guthrie. They understand very well that it's the board's job to hire and fire the CEO, and it's Canberra's job to hire and fire me and the board. But those are two completely separate things.
The Liberal MP Eric Abetz says the reasons behind Ms Guthrie's sacking should be made public, but the Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he won't be seeking a please explain from the ABC board.
Let's not forget they're an independent board. It's their job, and they will need to have gone through all the proper processes to make the decision that they have. I want to see an ABC that's strong and doing its job and well run, and the board does as well. That's what they're responsible for, and I'll hold them to account for that.
Some ABC staff have tweeted their relief over Ms Guthrie's sacking, with some reporting there had been cheering. For her part, Michelle Guthrie has put out a statement saying she's devastated and her dismissal is totally unjustified. She's now considering her legal options. The ABC says it started an immediate search to find a successor. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Brown, 10A.
It's 6:11. There's been a flood of feedback on the truancy story we had a little earlier by Andrew McVeigh. Richard's got in touch and says, I think Richard's emailed in, he says, I support what the principal has to say. I'm pleased to see a change of attitude from 30 years ago when my daughter was truant from Fraser and was suspended for 3 days. The only problem I see was that the target audience was probably absent. Perhaps a bit cynical there from Richard, but we've got someone else in touch who says, I wagged when I attended Fraser High School back in the 1990s. Not a loser now, having just finished my PhD. But I would suggest there's a culture of low expectations for students in that school community. The principal should inspire and be strength-based. So plenty of advice there on the pedagogy that Fraser High School should employ. At another education-based story just coming up to 10 minutes to 6. The Victoria University Council this afternoon voted 9-2 to change its name to University of Wellington, dropping the reference to the former monarch. It's an attempt to distinguish it from the 15 other universities around the world that use the name Victoria. Emma Hatton was there.
It was an otherwise standard University Council meeting today, bar the main event.
So the first resolution is that under Section 1625 of the Education Act 1989, the Council recommend to the Minister of Education that the legal name of the university be changed from Victoria University of Wellington to University of Wellington. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against, please raise your hand. I declare the motion carried, 9 votes to 2.
The decision was met with some booing and shaking of heads by those attending the meeting, but outside of the meeting, students like Eva weren't too worried.
If they feel that strongly about changing the name and that they need the identity of Wellington, then I mean, go for it. But yeah, it doesn't really affect me much.
And it would seem a lot of people feel this way. Feedback received from students and alumni was minimal, but those who did speak were a passionate minority. Law Professor Jeff McVeigh told the Council the consultation process had been inadequate.
We can see from the written submissions people feel this process has been a foreclosed one. 60% of respondents in a TEU poll said the consultation process has been inadequate. Only 29% said it had been adequate.
But the only full-time student elected to the council, Isabel Lenahan-Eichen, says despite her agreement the process had been botched, a change was needed.
However, if I strip back the multitude of really valid issues that have been raised around the process, around the issues of disconnect, and I deal specifically with the issue of the name change, I am in support.
The cost to change the name has been estimated at almost $1 million, with almost a third of that expected to go toward updating the university's online presence. It's the 5th time there's been a proposal to change the university's name. The Vice-Chancellor, Grant Guilford, who recommended the latest name change, declared a conflict of interest and did not place a vote. Before removing himself, he said while he empathised with the nostalgia and emotional connection people had to the name Victoria, the university operated in a rapidly changing environment, and the 120-year-old name was a constraint on progress and caused needless confusion. After the meeting, he defended the consultation process.
We went out to 50,000 alumni, and in the end we only got engagement from a little over 1,500. So I suppose the lessons that we will take from it is how to actually improve that engagement with our alumni. We used everything we could think of, face-to-face, social media, direct mails, but in the end only got small engagement.
For the next 3 years, graduates will have the option of having the new name or the former name on their diplomas. Those who have already graduated can request a new certificate with the name change. The final decision now lies with the Education Minister, who has the authority to accept the Council's recommendation or not. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
It's 7 minutes to 6. 2 days ago, an Indian solo yachtsman, Abhilash Tommy, sent out a cry for help. Abhilash Tommy was taking part in the round-the-world Golden Globe race when more than 3,000 kilometres off the coast of Western Australia, his mast broke. An international rescue mission is underway to reach him. The BBC's Catherine DaCosta has the details.
39-year-old Abhilash Tommy was among the competitors to set off from France on July the 1st as part of the 30,000-mile round-the-world race. With only a satellite phone linking him to the outside world, he was warned by the Australian Coast Guard on Thursday of worsening weather conditions.
It's literally not coming towards you, it's forming over the top of you.
Oh, okay. So it's hopefully shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, that's right. You guys have got it. It's going to be vicious, but it's short and sweet.
The following day, a severe storm whipped up 45-foot waves, breaking the mast on Mr. Tommy's yacht. He also suffered severe back injuries and can only communicate using a texting unit after his sat phone was broken. A huge multinational rescue mission is underway with both Indian and Australian vessels en route, but they could take several days to reach the area. However, a spokesperson for the race, Barry Pickthall, says an Irish sailor who also lost his mast is using makeshift rigging and could reach Mr Tommy sooner.
He's about 40 miles from Ablagash's position, and he's likely to be the first person on the scene. But he's sailing under jury rig, making about 3 knots towards him. It's still actually very rough conditions there. It's about 40-knot winds.
It's also hoped a French fisheries patrol boat will arrive tomorrow evening with medical supplies on board.
That's Catherine Da Costa there reporting at 5 minutes to 6. We do want to stay on the water because we want to update you on the information in Tanzania. A ferry accident happened there last week. You remember there's been a mass burial that's taken place. 224 people are known to have died. The boat capsized on Lake Victoria on Thursday, but the final death toll may never be known as it's unclear just how many people were on board that ferry. It was overcrowded, that's something we do know, and it flipped over. Now the BBC's Abubakar Famo reports.
Hundreds of mourners gathered near the shores of Lake Victoria at Ukara Island to pay their last respect to 9 victims of MV Nyerere, who were given a mass burial. The event was presided over by the Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa, as well as other government officials.
The government will create an investigative commission which will involve experts and security organs in order to investigate and establish the cause of the accident. Proper measures will be taken against those responsible for the incident.
Out of the 9 buried today, 5 were disfigured beyond recognition, but officials say their DNA details will be kept to allow future identification.
Some people were recovered after 3 days, which means it was difficult to identify them. Their relatives didn't recognise them, so the DNA details will help us.
Survivors of the ferry tragedy gave testimonies of how the ferry, with a capacity to carry only 101 passengers, carried more than 260 passengers.
I was in the ferry and it was fine at first, but when we were coming back, that is when the trouble began. It was overloaded with passengers and goods. There were hundreds of sacks of maize. Later I saw water coming in and the person behind me started wailing, and then I found myself in deep water and God helped me to come to the surface.
The death toll from the disaster, one of the worst in recent years, now stands at 224, although other reports indicate that the number could be over 250. This area is now going to be a symbol of sad memories for residents of Ukara Island and Tanzanians generally. On the other hand, the government says it's planning to build a monument with all names of the victims on it.
That's Abubakar Famo reporting from Tanzania. It's coming up to 2 minutes to 6. There's really been a lot of feedback on the truancy story. Andrew McVeigh was with us a little earlier on reporting. He was at the school this morning and he spoke to parents, he spoke to students. If you listen back to the report, this is Katrina Batten's coming in for the news, and I'm going to get to some of the texts that we've been receiving. There was a lot of passion, and even some of the students berating their fellow students for being out there on the footpath and wagging school. One person's been in touch and says those parents who were saying the high school principal called their children losers and that what she said was unsuitable for children to hear need to listen carefully and not be so overreactive. These children are adolescents, young adults, not primary schoolers. The message was that truants are more likely to feature in the negative statistics. No surprises there. However, I agree with the observation that the children interviewed were very articulate and balanced in their views, unlike the parents. Another one's got in touch. That parent berating the principal personified all that is bad about the parenting in New Zealand. Obviously, it isn't the child's fault. What guidance are they receiving? So someone a bit more negative there about the parenting and pointing the finger at them. Another person in support of the principal. That principal is right on the mark. She has had a guts full of it. I work with prisoners and every one of them tell me that they wag school and they wish they hadn't. Every single one. Someone who works with prisoners getting in touch. Finally, I support, this is another person who's got in touch I think on the text, I support what the principal has to say. I'm pleased to see a change of attitude from 30 years ago when my daughter was truant from I think we've had this one before, I think. We've chucked it in again, but someone whose daughter was actually suspended for 3 days as a result of truancy, and I wonder myself what sort of message that might be sending to the students. Maybe that's exactly what they like. Anyway, it seems to have got all your interest, so get in touch, of course, on the text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Of course, we're on Facebook. Our video reports are particularly put up on the Facebook page, and email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Lots more to come on Checkpoint tonight after the 6 o'clock news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batten-Aho. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, has mistakenly announced border-wide screening for imported Australian strawberries. Needles were found for the first time in New Zealand yesterday. They were in a punnet imported from Western Australia and bought by a customer at the St Luke's Countdown in Auckland. There's been a rash of similar cases in Australia over the past 2 weeks. At this afternoon's post-cabinet briefing, Mr Peters said the government will work to ensure any imported strawberries are safe.
We're doing the best we can with all the resources we've got. There's going to be, in terms of exporting into this country, screening of every strawberry punnet.
Winston Peters says New Zealand authorities will carry out the screening, but couldn't give details about the exact process or equipment. However, the Primary Industries Minister, Damien O'Connor, says that's not correct, as there will be no new checks. A partner at law firm Russell McVeigh has been banned from the office while an investigation is underway into comments made at a client event. An independent review of bullying and sexual harassment at the firm was released in July. Te Anawa Hurihanganui reports.
Russell McVeigh has confirmed the complaint relates to a partner making inappropriate comments while drunk at a client event. In February, Russell McVeigh was thrust into the limelight when it received 3 sexual assault complaints involving interns at the firm. After the sexual misconduct allegations in 2015 and 2016, an independent review found the firm had a culture of excessive drinking. Russell McVeigh Chair Malcolm Crotty says everyone in the organisation knows what is expected of them and the firm will not tolerate any inappropriate behaviour. A more detailed statement following the outcome of the investigation is expected within the next fortnight. Ko te aniwa, Hurihanganui aho.
Otago University's proctor has defended going into an unlocked flat as his attempt to help students gain degrees and not criminal convictions. Student magazine Critic has reported proctor Dave Scott, a former police officer, entered the flat, which was empty apart from one sleeping resident, and confiscated bongs about 3 weeks ago. A university spokesperson says what was done was unusual and unlikely to be repeated. The spokesperson says neither the proctor nor the university claim a right to search private premises, but Mr Scott's actions were carried out in a way which the university is confident was to their advantage. Mr Scott says he's focused on helping students gain degrees and not criminal convictions. The Vice-Chancellor of Victoria University is defending the consultation process which gathered feedback on changing the university's name. The University Council voted 9-2 this afternoon to change its name to University of Wellington, dropping the reference to the former monarch. More than 2,000 submissions were received, with 75% opposing the change. During the council meeting, the level of engagement with students and staff was criticised. But after the meeting, Vice-Chancellor Grant Guilford says they'd done all that they could.
We went out to 50,000 alumni, and in the end we only got engagement from a little over 1,500. We used everything we could think of, face-to-face, social media, direct mails, but in the end only got small engagement. Victoria
University Vice-Chancellor Grant Guilford. The Māori Land Court has dismissed an application for an injunction to prevent a 1080 drop over Russell State Forest. 2 Northland men, Hayward Brown and Ricky Ngākoti, asked the court to stop the drop, arguing that the land is Māori reservation and DOC does not have a full consent to use 1080. But the judge ruled that the land involved is Crown land and a scenic reserve, and the Māori Land Court has no jurisdiction over it. Met Service is warning that freezing gale force winds over the next few days could be hazardous to stock. Meteorologist Georgina Griffiths says the cold air is just starting to hit the lower South Island now, with snow and heavy rain expected. Ms Griffiths says the worst weather will arrive late tomorrow, with the cold wind causing the biggest problems.
So from a stock point of view and a driving point of view, pretty hazardous from more or less tonight and especially Tuesday night and into Wednesday in the far south of the country.
Georgina Griffiths says that in Invercargill the air temperature may be at 4 or 5 degrees, but the wind chill will bring it down to near zero. She says the North Island will also feel the effects, with a snow warning for the Desert Road on Tuesday and strong winds in Auckland. It's 6:05. Sport. Jack Nicklaus believes Tiger Woods still has a realistic chance of matching his record to tally of 18 major golf championships. 14-time major champion Woods capped his remarkable comeback by ending a 5-year drought with victory at the PGA Tour's season-ending event this morning. Nicklaus won his 18th and final major at the age of 46 and says 42-year-old Woods is capable of winning the 5 majors he needs to claim the record.
I think it's realistic. I mean, if you look at today's equipment and the way the guys take care of themselves today, I think they could play well into their 50s. Maybe Tiger's got another 40 majors to play. So, out of 40 majors, can he win 5 of them? I don't know. Certainly, I think he's playing well enough. It depends on how much he wants to work at it, how interested he is, how long he wants to make a commitment to do that.
Golfing great Jack Nicklaus. The Warriors captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck leads a contingent of 7 club members in contention for honours at Rugby League's Dally M Awards in Sydney on Wednesday night. Tuivasa-Sheck is a favourite for the NRL's Player of the Year award and is also up for Best Captain and Best Fullback. Coach Stephen Kearney, wing David Fusitua, hooker Isaac Luke, second rower Tohu Harris, interchange player Jazz Tavanga and Warriors women's team dummy half Crystal Rota are also up for honours. And Team Europe have retained tennis's Laver Cup after a dramatic final day against Team World. Rallying from a doubles defeat, Swiss star Roger Federer and German world number 5 Alexander Zverev both won their singles to give the Europeans an unassailable 13-8 lead in Chicago. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dr. Judy Lawrence on adapting to climate change, given it's too late to stop it entirely. And we have part 2 of our window on the world of the Oxford Dictionary of Biography, and why you turn to it for a guide to who's who, rather than Mr. Google.
You were a DJ at the Hacienda. What did you learn from those days?
It was an amazing experience for me. I was in my early 20s when I was DJing there. It was the ultimate club to play at.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms from late this afternoon until tomorrow afternoon, mainly in the west. Snow to 800 metres about the Central Plateau tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, however, a few showers this evening and again tomorrow. Nelson, showers today, possibly thundery late afternoon, mainly fine tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, showers, some heavy today. Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, rain or showers with heavy falls and snow lowering to 400 metres, clearing tomorrow morning. Showers returning to Otago later tomorrow with snow to 100 metres and southwest gales near the coast. Southland and Fiordland, showers, snow to 300 metres tonight and to 100 metres later tomorrow with southwest gales near the coast. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. On the eve of the United Nations Leaders Week in New York, the difference in direction of the Trump-led United States and New Zealand under Jacinda Ardern is starkly obvious. Ms Ardern today rejected Donald Trump's plan to escalate the war on drugs, while also restating New Zealand's support for the Iran nuclear deal, which Mr Trump has pulled out of. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell is in New York and filed this report.
The US President jetted into New York this afternoon with a massive motorcade belting through midtown Manhattan. His big event today hosting a group of countries which have agreed to sign up to the US's document called the Global Call to Action on the World Drug Problem. But Jacinda Ardern won't be there. Why? Because New Zealand is not signing up to it.
No, it's not our intention to, and there are a number of other countries who haven't either.
So why not?
There's a particular opioid focus. We obviously have an agenda that is focused on addressing issues around drug use. We have a number of challenges that are quite specific to New Zealand and the particular drugs that are present, but also on taking a health approach. We want to do what works.
Ms Ardern also continues to back the Iran nuclear deal, which Donald Trump has pulled out of. Ms Ardern saying it's an example of a multi-country approach that works. She was asked whether Mr Trump was the threat to the international rules-based system that she's pushing back against with all her promotion of multilateral systems.
I wouldn't rule out in any particular country. There are a number of areas where we've seen multilateral institutions challenged. Our message as a country, as New Zealand, is that those institutions are really important to us, particularly to countries like ours.
Outside the United Nations, the city's in lockdown, with thousands of police on the streets ahead of the UN General Assembly getting underway tomorrow. There are cordons in place, security checkpoints and hundreds of barrier vehicles, along with 50 trucks full of sand, some of which are lined up in front of Trump Tower. But there are plenty of events off-site as well. The 9th Annual Social Goods Summit in uptown Manhattan's focused on using technology to make the world a better place. As he introduced Ms Ardern, the opening speaker, Henry Timms from Cultural Centre 92Y, made a veiled dig at Donald Trump's own use of social media.
At a time when we were promised that this would be a time of much more empowerment, actually what we see increasingly around the world is a pivot towards a more authoritarian state. We see strong men re-emerging, often supercharged by some of the very technology that we thought would liberate us.
Ms Ardern's speech focused on children, better conditions for families and empowering women, messages that went down well with the rapturous crowd.
We might only be 4.5 million people, but we were the first country in the world to give women the right to vote 125 years ago. We've had 3 female prime ministers. It's really not a big deal, guys.
The Prime Minister has a big week ahead. Tomorrow morning starts with a live spot on the Today Show, a program with an audience of 4 million people. From there, she has 2 speeches and talks with leaders from Ireland, Colombia and Austria. And tomorrow night, she'll head to Donald Trump's reception for visiting leaders, which unfortunately is closed to the media. In New York for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
It's 12 minutes past 6. The owner of a Carterton property at the centre of a school decontamination scare on Friday says the situation has been blown out of proportion and a gastrobug is more likely to have made pupils sick, not his compost. Emergency services responded to an outbreak of vomiting at Southend Primary School on Friday afternoon. Several pupils were taken to hospital and more than 20 were decontaminated at the school. Police today determined the illness was caused by a pile of compost at a property that shares its boundary with the school. Also, the source of the pungent odour detected at the time the children complained of being unwell. The compost belongs to Ilya McClellan, whose daughter attends Southend School. She was one of the pupils decontaminated. Mr McClellan rejects that the compost is to blame.
I had been told different things about where it was the children had sort of smelt it and, apparently been affected by it, by the smell. So I didn't actually, I sort of had a suspicion it was something to do with the compost on Friday, and I actually said to a friend of mine, I said, imagine if it was the compost that caused this big fuss. And then the police actually came and asked about it on Friday evening briefly, and then didn't hear anything else from them for a couple of days, and then they turned up this morning and asked sort of to have a look at it again, and I sort of dug a hole. It was still in a sort of mound at that time, so I sort of dug a hole in it and pulled some out, and they had a smell, and we were sort of, and it does smell sulphurous, so it's sort of very, quite reminiscent of Rotorua, if you've been there. I think, personally, I think when it was dumped off the truck, it was a really hot day. It had just come from the place where they make the stuff.
And it was really hot itself, wasn't it? They were saying that it was fresh or actually very hot because it had been kept in a confined space for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, they sort of they manufacture it up there and put it through a process, and then it had been taken out of there, put on the back of the truck, and then it was quite a warm day as well, so that sort of was a factor. And the wind was actually, a southerly, which would take the sort of aroma of it right onto the school. And when it was dumped off the back of the trailer of the truck, that sort of moment of displacement would have made it blow. I mean, particles would have been sort of transported by the wind and so on right into where some kids were playing, so they would have smelt it and been like, oh, I smelled this chemical smell. And then some other kids said, oh, well, I saw a plane, and, all these factors came together. And also there's been a lot of this gastro going around Carterton and Wairarapa recently. Just down the road at another primary, there were 40 kids affected by gastro, I think a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. So I think all of these things have come together and created this thing.
Right, you think it could be a mix of both? But I guess you run a farm there, Ilya. I mean, how often does this happen? How often do you arrange someone to be dropping off fertiliser, and has it happened before?
No, we don't have a farm. It's just sort of a lifestyle block.
Right.
But we have we grow a lot of vegetables, and we have chickens, and we're sort of attempting to live off the land a bit more than we have in the past. We used to live in Melbourne, and now we've moved out here to Carterton, so it's quite a change. And we are trying to grow our own stuff, and the compost is something. We've had it delivered twice before in the past, and there's been nothing like this has happened.
Right. So, at what stage did you think, okay, I'm to blame here? Was it when you were going through the pile with the police on site, or was it a bit earlier than that?
Well, no, I mean, I never thought I was to blame. I thought that there was a hysteria that sort of came out of, a few kids panicking, some kids seeing a plane, saying he saw some stuff falling out of it, some kids smelling a chemical sulphurous smell. So, I mean, I regret that, it had something to do with us putting compost in our garden, but I don't feel any guilt or blame or anything like that.
Right. I guess, though, in the future, you might just arrange things to be delivered a bit differently, though.
Well, I suppose. I mean, maybe if it's going to cause any sort of fuss in the future. But, I mean, I do think it was just a funny little thing that I think in future a kid should not be told to invent some story about seeing stuff falling out of a plane, and that would help, because that didn't happen. It was an aerobatic plane flying to the South Island, and there was no way he would be able to see anything falling out of it at the altitude it would have been at. So there was a significant amount of exaggeration that went on, and then asking children if they're sick is always an interesting thing, because a lot of children are sick now and then, and I just think this thing got sort of blown completely out of proportion. And honestly, the mushroom compost is completely safe. They've been manufacturing this stuff for years, and it's really popular around here. A lot of people use it on their gardens to grow food, so I don't think there's any danger from compost.
Yeah, so it sounds the way you're talking there, Ilya, that you think this thing was really the gastro bug and not the compost at all.
Well, that's what I think personally. Yeah, I think there might have been a couple of kids with gastro, a couple of kids who smelt the stuff, sort of got maybe the smell sort of did make them a little bit nauseous, but I don't think that it would make people physically sick. I mean, I was spreading the stuff out of my garden this morning, and I don't understand how anyone could get sick from the stuff. To be perfectly honest.
Ilya McClellan there, he maintains his compost was not the main cause of those kids getting sick, but may have contributed with the wind blowing the smell, that sulphur smell, across the boundary to the school there in Carterton. It's coming up to 19 minutes past 6. A partner at law firm Russell McVeigh has been banned from the office while an investigation is underway into comments he made was accused to have made at a client event. Chairman Malcolm Crotty confirmed in a statement late this afternoon the investigation relates to the partner making inappropriate comments while attending a client event under the influence of alcohol. Mr Crotty has declined to be interviewed, but joining us now is New Zealand Law Society President Catherine Beck. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
My first question really is, have you been made aware of this disciplinary action, I guess even temporary disciplinary action, because anyone, I guess, who's a lawyer is registered with the Law Society. So have you had any contact from Russell McVeigh yourself?
I'm aware of this from the statements like you are, and it seems to me that their process is not completed yet, so I wouldn't expect to hear from them officially until they had gone through their own process.
Okay, now I think it was back in July we had the report after an independent review into bullying and sexual harassment at the firm. That was led by Dame Margaret Baisley, and I think a lot of the more telling results and conclusions from that was that alcohol certainly features, as well as a particular culture that's been let linger for too long. It seems alcohol again is the problem here.
Yeah, listen, one of the things that Dame Margaret's report said that they needed to achieve was culture change. And culture change is hard and it takes time. And it doesn't happen overnight. There's only been a few months since that report was released. It seems to me that it's about setting really clear expectations of what behaviour you're looking for moving forward and what's not okay. But when you're going through a process of that real culture change, it's often about the response that you make when those new expectations aren't being met. And I think what I'm seeing here is that there's quite a clear and strong response. We're hearing about a process that's in place. Obviously, we don't know where that's going to go. But even the fact that we're hearing about it is progress. The statement I read said that we're going to get more detail down the track. Seems to me that they've drawn quite a bright line here and seem to be committing to trying to make the change. We'll see what process brings.
Sure, and I appreciate, of course, as do our listeners, that we can't say too much about it at this stage and that they are accusations and it is still under investigation. However, it seems, of course, I mean, perhaps this sort of investigation may not have happened before the big news stories that have come out, since the beginning of this year about these accusations. I mean, are you confident that this will be investigated fairly? And do you also think perhaps that law firms need to be more proactive in terms of, as you say, getting further down the track in changing culture?
I mean, any form of culture change needs to be proactive. You can't sort of set new expectations and hope that they'll change on their own. I understand that Russell McVeigh in this case and a lot of other law firms are taking quite thoughtful steps to try and change what's going on within their organisations. But again, it will be around people actually having to walk the talk.
And what does that involve, Catherine? I mean, you're saying there's thoughtful steps that are being taken. What do you see that gives you more confidence and optimism at the moment?
Well, we at the Law Society, we asked all of our large law firms a month or so ago what steps they were taking to address these issues within their workplaces, and all 15 of them responded. They had some quite concrete steps in terms of working with their staff to set expectations in relation to what was acceptable behaviour within the workplace, working through with them what would happen when those expectations weren't met. This is an example, of course, of where they're investigating, where it appears that their expectations have not been met.
Catherine, do you hear much from, I know you have all your members, but of course there's interns as well, and it was the interns, I think, that really blew the whistle on this story. Are you getting much feedback from them about how they feel going into these big firms, being very vulnerable, obviously wanting perhaps a full-time job at the end of it? Do you hear much about how things might be changing for them and how they can operate and feel safe in that environment?
In terms of people moving from law school and into law firms, I think as a result of the massive discussion that we had in a very public forum earlier this year, there was a lot of trepidation and some concern about whether they were going into places that were truly respectful, inclusive and safe. I think everybody's done a lot of work, and the legal community has done a lot of work since then to ensure that actually these young people are safe. They're probably the safest they've ever been, in particular because of the enormous scrutiny that the profession has been under. And certainly I think that doesn't stop them asking questions and constantly looking to see that these places are places that they want to work, where they're going to feel valued. And I know that all law firms, and in particular our large law firms, are taking that really seriously.
Catherine Beck, thank you. Thank you very much for your time, President of the New Zealand Law Society there. Just the first reaction we've got to what's been announced today, which is an investigation into a worker at Russell McVeigh who's been stood down after accusations were made about an incident at an event where there was alcohol as well. It's coming up to 25 minutes past 6. Former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig is back in court. This is for round 2 of his battle against former Press Secretary Rachel McGregor. Colin Craig is suing Miss McGregor over statements she made to co-founder of the Taxpayers Union Jordan Williams, and in a media statement and tweet. At the same time, Ms McGregor has responded with a counterclaim over what Mr Craig said to media himself and to Conservative Party members. Our reporter Tom Furley has been in the High Court.
Colin Craig stood alone in court today, representing himself. His former Press Secretary Rachel McGregor sat behind her lawyers in the public gallery, surrounded by supporters including victims advocate Ruth Money, journalist Paula Penfold and broadcaster Alison Moore. Colin Craig began the morning by telling the judge he was withdrawing his claim for damages, but he would still be suing for a declaration. Mr Craig is suing for 3 statements made by Ms McGregor after she resigned, the first being a conversation she had with Jordan Williams from the Taxpayers Union, including details about their relationship, alleged sexual harassment and a dispute over pay. He also says a media statement and tweet Ms McGregor made in relation to a confidential settlement between them were also defamatory.
Essentially, on 3 different occasions, she published statements which I submit conveyed the pleaded imputations in my statement of claim. These are publications that would lower my standing in the estimation of ordinary people and or expose me to ridicule, contempt or hatred.
He says the pair had a friendly relationship and her allegations weren't true. Ms McGregor's lawyer, Hayden Wilson, told the court his client was sent a series of letters, cards, poems and gifts, and Mr Craig had sought out her company inappropriately. He says she came to view that this amounted to sexual harassment, and the day she resigned she put through a complaint to the Human Rights Commission. That settlement was made confidentially. Her counterclaim includes statements made by Mr Craig in a press conference at the height of the rumours on their relationship, in which he went over details of that settlement.
From the moment that Mr Craig appeared at the 22 June media conference with Mrs Craig by his side and talked about our inappropriate conduct and not his inappropriate conduct, as an experienced politician he would have known that he was creating a media event. And having lit that fire, he used it as an occasion to introduce new and further defamatory statements about Ms McGregor.
Ms McGregor is also countersuing for a letter sent out to around 8,000 Conservative Party members in a booklet distributed to around 1.6 million people.
The scale of the publication of each of the defamatory statements is frankly unprecedented. Both press conferences were covered by all of the national media. Mr Craig's booklet was distributed to 1.6 million households in New Zealand. And it's our suspicion that every step that Mr Craig took was choreographed, was carefully planned to attract maximum attention. By doing that, caused maximum damage.
Lawyer Hayden Wilson says Ms McGregor had confided in Mr Williams to help with her sexual harassment claim and believed it was in confidence. Both Mr Craig and Ms McGregor are due to give evidence during the hearing, which is set down for 2 weeks. From the High Court in Auckland, Tom Furley.
It's coming up to 6:30 to France now, where efforts are underway to stop a ticking environmental disaster. Teams of divers have begun removing thousands of old car tyres from the sea floor along the French Riviera. They were put there more than 30 years ago to create an artificial reef, but marine life never took to it. Instead, the tyres have been polluting the sea. The BBC's Marion Strawn has the details.
In the 1980s, 25,000 tyres were dropped into the Mediterranean Sea, 500 metres from the shore between Cannes and Antibes on the Côte d'Azur. It was hailed as a brilliant solution, both to get rid of old tyres and create a new habitat for marine life. At the time, it was thought to be completely safe, but in 2005, researchers found they were leaking chemicals, including heavy metals. The removal is costing more than $1 million, a fifth of which is being financed by the Michelin Foundation. Guillaume Bertrand from the French Agency for Biodiversity said the job of retrieving the tyres was quite dangerous.
La difficulté, c'est que c'est un travail très technique. La visibilité est très mauvaise parce que
the difficulty is that it's a very technical job. The visibility is very bad because when the diver reaches the bottom, there are big clouds of sediment that get suspended, so he can hardly see anything. There's a lot of scrap on the bottom, there are a lot of dangerous materials, a lot of cables. So it's a very technical, very meticulous job for which you really need a lot of experience.
France is not the only country to try and create a tyre reef. In the United States, 2 million tyres were dumped off the coast of Florida. Their removal is still underway. Meanwhile, the authorities say France's tyre graveyard will be removed by 2020.
That's all for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Ka kite a pōpō.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters has mistakenly announced widespread screening for imported strawberries, with Primary Industries Minister Damien O'Connor saying there'll be no new checks. A partner at law firm Russell McVeigh has been banned from the office while an investigation is underway into comments made at a client event. Otago University proctor Dave Scott has defended going into an unlocked flat and taking bongs as a bid to help students gain degrees, not convictions. And Victoria University's Vice-Chancellor has defended its way of gathering data on the name change after the council vote went against the majority. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Focusing on the major Pacific stories of the day, Dateline Pacific.
It's good for Tuvalu because it's a small country. It was a really, really easy target.